Okay, let's talk about this little green owl here. This is the delightful yet sometimes unhinged duo from Duolingo. So why are we talking about Duolingo? Well, I think that they're a modern product success story. They have 47 million daily active users today. They're worth north of $15 billion. So it's no surprise that when they released this just a couple of weeks ago, maybe even months now, which is a handbook on how they do product, it got my attention. And I've gone through this. There's a lot of good learnings inside of this. And what I wanted to do, I've been dying to do this for a little while now, is create a video and go through it. I want to go through the 5 principles that they have in here. They talk about a whole bunch of different practices that they do, from things like how they run product reviews, their TLDRs, things like dog fooding, which they've been very open and famous for as well. So we're going to talk about all of that. I'm going to have a link to it below as well if you want to go read it yourself. Let's get into it. I just saw this note. Before reading, Duolingo is a product-led organization, but the ideas in this book aren't just for building great products. They're about building a great company together. Not every section applies to every employee in every situation. Think of these principles. Think of the principles simply as a guide to understand how we work when can't even talk. Understand how we work when we're at our best. I think that's a worthy point. And just to double down on that, actually, like a lot of the things in this, because they did take such a principle-led perspective, we'll obviously jump into some of the practices inside of it, but because they took such a principle-led, this is very applicable to all kinds of companies, all kinds of products. So it's definitely relevant. So taking the long view. Now, I really like that they called this out. So basically the summary of this is, if it helps us in the short term but hurts us in the long term, it's not right. It's not what we should do. One of the early versions of this principle was essentially don't do dumb shit, right? So they had the saying in the early days, as they say here, don't do dumb shit. If it seems dumb, in other words, we're doing something that is, great. It's a gimmick, it's a trick. It seems helpful, but it's going to hurt us down the road. Let's just not do it, right? There's a few things that I want to zoom in on here that I think are really, really cool and worth calling out, right? So we get that we need to be long-term thinking. We get that building a product is not a short-term thing. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But what are some of the practical takeaways we can get? Well, being a technology company, one of the things that they did was they betted on technology, right? They took that long view from the start, which meant that they were embracing new technologies. And as they said, they are tech optimists. Now, this is really, really relevant right now in 2025 with the advent of AI and what everyone's dealing with right now. You can think of what's happening with AI and this principle as exactly what they're talking about here. Are you taking a bet on technology? Right now, are you burying your head in the sand, or are you actually taking a bet on AI, even though it's got a whole bunch of problems and warts and it hallucinates, and yes, it's not great at basic math and this type of stuff that people have already pointed out, but it's only going to get better, right? And one of the things that they did was really just bet on that technology, double down on it, and allow those things to get better. And I think one of the things that I observe with my clients and the companies that I think do better than other companies is that they do this, right? They are willing to invest in it. They're willing to explore and learn a little bit. And over time, when the technology gets better, you are prime position to really take advantage of it, because you have all this learning and all these years of tinkering with it and playing with it, that when it finally becomes good enough to do something actually practical and meaningful with it, not to say that you can't do something practical and meaningful with AI right now, but just that as an example, you are already miles ahead of the people who are just getting into it and just starting out with it, right? So that's something that they really, really did from the get-go. And I think it's super relevant, particularly right now, especially with AI. This one, I'll just touch on quickly because I learned this, and many product leaders out there have learned this the hard way as well, firsthand. Basically, taking that long view on hiring. Hiring's so important, as they say, but like, sometimes we get into this position where we have, and that's what this pitch is meant to be, we've got like this hole to fill, and we're trying to fill that hole, and it feels urgent in the moment because there's problems arising because we don't have someone to do XYZ, and we essentially compromise on our hiring standards. And they have a saying, which I thought, which is worth highlighting. They basically say it's better to have a hole than an asshole, right? And whilst I don't think I've ever hired any assholes in the past, not to say that I'm perfect in any way, I've definitely hired some people who weren't a great fit, had some, some flaws, or maybe didn't fit, missing capabilities or something like that. And it definitely didn't, whilst it helped fill some of that hole, it created a whole bunch of other problems down the line. And I definitely will never do that again. That is something I've done more than once, and every single time it hasn't worked out. And every single product leader I speak to who's done something like that has had a similar story. So they talk about a whole bunch of other things around here about like forever products and that tension between short-term goals and long-term goals. This is definitely a great example of that, right? So they're talking about obviously more notification leads to more daily active users in the short term. But if you spam your users with notifications all the time, people will get sick of it. They'll get frustrated and they won't stick around for the long term, or they'll even turn off notifications as well, which means that they basically render it useless when we want to use it in the future, right? So a good example of that balance between short term and long term. Now, this is something I wanted to zoom in on as well that's worth it. So engineering the future. And what I love is essentially this sentence along here, right? We don't build systems to last forever. Instead, we test ideas quickly and only invest significant engineering resources when something is successful. If something doesn't work, we move on quickly, keeping the code base clean and minimizing waste. And they go on to have an example. Video call is a great example. We only invested in scaling and stabilizing it for the long run once it showed traction with users. They had another example and other examples, right? I wish I can remember who, so I'm not taking credit for this. This is somebody else who said it. I heard it at a conference. It was a CTO, a serial founder CTO, basically talking. I don't remember the person's name. I wish I did so I could attribute it to him. But basically they were talking about tech debt and they said, you need to earn the right to pay tech debt back. And that is essentially an encapsulation of what they're talking about here, which is we are going to deliberately incur tech debt, because we want to build things really cheap. We want to test things quickly, right? We're only going to invest significant effort at making it clean and, making it scalable and making it secure and blah, 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 when we see that it's successful and we get metrics to say so, right? Otherwise, we're just basically investing into something that's not proven. And this is one of the mentalities that you need to have if you really want to enable that rapid experimentation inside of your company, right? So experimentation is something that's really, really cool. You've probably heard it a lot. It's absolutely core to building great products and innovating. It's really like almost a quantity game, right? Like we just got to do more and more experiments faster and faster, right? But one of the ways that you do that is obviously by trying to make the experiment cheap. One of the ways that you do that is by not over investing here. But we also just don't want to do that because we want to minimize waste, right? We don't want to put all this energy into something that's not proven yet. And this is a huge mindset shift, even from engineers, right? Because, it's hard to think about deliberately or intentionally incurring some tech debt. So we can then pay it back later. But the payback period has to align to, again, actually proving that it works. So that's what that CTO was talking about with earning the right to pay it back. You've got to earn the right by proving that this is something worth investing into. If you can't prove that this is something worth investing into, we're going to delete it and we're going to move on with our lives because there's so many opportunities that we can work on, right? So I really love that they called that out. That's something that I also observe with some of the companies that I think do better in terms of product. They, have better discovery cycles, more rapid experimentation. The companies that really struggle with this are the ones that struggle with some of these things. So principle 2, let's talk about raising the bar. I like this statement here. Excellence isn't some lofty goal, it's our baseline. So this is another observation that I make between, again, the companies that are my clients that I think are on the better side of the fence and those that are maybe struggling a lot more, right? One of them is how we think about excellence. Operational excellence is something I think about, or I talk about a lot and they think about a lot. And on one side of the fence, you have a company that operational excellence is the baseline. Standard, de facto, we do things to a good standard, right? Now, this obviously goes a little counter to that tech dev thing. But what I mean by operational excellence is that we strive that when we do something, we do it well, right? So if I'm producing a document, I'm going to do that well. If I'm trying to give training material to frontline staff to learn about the new product that we're launching, I do that well. I go above and beyond. I put a lot of energy into it. When we service our customers, we do that well. If I'm going to fix anything, I'm going to fix the defects. I'm going to keep the platform stable, all of that type of stuff. That is a given at product companies in my experience. The companies that struggle, the non-product companies, are the ones that are struggling with product a lot more. This isn't a given. This is when they get into arguments like, oh, but like we need to fix this thing and it doesn't link to any of our OKRs. We need to make a operational OKR. We need to create OKRs for our BAU work, right? Like the business as usual work. No, you don't need to do any of that stuff, right? Operational excellence, that BAU work, the stuff that we need to do to keep the lights on, to keep the company running, all of those things are a baseline. They are a given, right? That is one of the big key differences. So that is some of the things that they're talking about here. I've probably extended it a little bit more and stretched the principle here, but that's definitely something that I observe between them. Actually, I'll tell you a story. Oh my God, here's the story, right? A client of mine ran a retrospective recently, and basically it was a bunch of finger pointing, in particular, finger pointing up. So essentially, none of the teams wanted to take any responsibility for anything. Basically, everything was the leader's fault. Now, some of that might be true. I'm not saying that it's not true, but it just shows the difference between a mentality of, I have nothing that I can improve. It is all somebody else's fault, in this case, the leaders, and the leaders need to fix X, Y, and Z. If they just did X, Y, and Z, everything would be perfect, which we know it wouldn't be. There's problems everywhere and we can all improve in some shape or form. But that just shows you an example of somebody on the other side of that fence. And it's just very somewhat recent example, so I thought I would share. No, I'm not bashing them in any way. I should just call that out. Like we all start somewhere, and then we have to shift the culture. But it just shows that stark difference between the two. One thing, going to zoom in again here. I really love this framing of like, let's be hard on the work, but easy on the people. We need to give feedback. We need to criticize each other's. We need to. That's the only way we improve. We want to do design critiques. We want to have. I love doing product sparring sessions, by the way, right? Where it's basically taken from design critiques. We're product managers. We get together and we spar. We go through a product spec. We go through a discovery plan. Somebody shows us their OKRs or how they frame the problem statement, and we critique it. And we bounce back and forth between each other's, and we give candid feedback. And that is one of the ways we grow and we improve. But none of that is a personal attack, right? None of it is, you're doing a terrible job. It's all on the work. So being hard on the work, critical on the work, and being easy on the people, I think is a great principle. And thank you, Duolingo. I'm going to steal some of that. Still with attribution. I'm not going to just blatantly rip it off, but I love it. On this, they talk about dog fooding, which I'm going to get to in a second, but I want to go over to setting the bar first, and then we'll go back to dog fooding. One of the things that they do is they set a bar, right? So this is the bar for product and design. The product has to meet these 4 elements. It needs to be useful, so learners, being the users of Duolingo, have to get utility out of it. It needs to be intuitive, right? They should be learning, not trying to figure out how the hell to use this app. It's got to be delightful. We want, features to have some fun and delight, which is totally on their brand. And we want it to be polished. We want it to feel complete, right? We want to have that bar of excellence, right? I will note here, polished means once we've proven that it's good. So what I love about this is when we say we're setting the bar and we're raising a bar, we are being explicit about what that bar is. And again, this is an observation that I have between those companies, is some companies are really explicit about all these things. Netflix, by the way, has a leadership handbook that is like bunch of pages, right? Very explicit about what is expected from leaders and managers at Netflix. And it breaks down all of their principles into different behaviors and stuff like that. This is the spectrum again of implicit versus explicit. And I tend to find making things more explicit, things more clear in companies tends to go a very, very long way. So this is just one example, but just to even pause here, it's definitely worth reflecting. Reflect on some of the things in your company that might be plaques on the walls or a couple of one-liner that you could probably do with making more explicit. We're going to talk about this a little bit more because they talk about it in the handbook, but here's a really tangible example. An exercise I like to do to just test some of these things is to go ask a bunch of people what they mean by it, right? So if you could take dog food in and ask a bunch of people what does dog food in mean, and just see if you get similar answers, right? I'm not looking for the exact same answers, but I'm just looking for similar answers. We did this with release. So seems pretty straightforward, right? Like we release the product. But do we? Do we release code? Do we release the product? And if we release, do we release to production or to an environment? And if we release to production, is that behind a feature flag or is that live to customers? Is that we release to users? And no surprise, there was a big discussion and we got like 5 different answers of what release means. So release is a great example. We're going to, again, talk more about that in a second because it's actually in this handbook. But this is a good example of where we probably need to bring some more clarity around it. And we probably need to be explicit about what we actually mean by release. So you'll be surprised some of the things that you might feel as though doesn't like, oh, it's no brainer. But trust me, it's not always that straightforward. Cool. Let's talk about dog fooding because this is something that Duolingo has been somewhat famous for. You might not have seen it, but I've definitely heard multiple people point to Duolingo that blogged about it in the past. They've spoken on podcasts in the past, their employees, about how much they are big on dog fooding. So apparently a lot of this came from their founder. He would report like every bug. He would be using the app every single day and he was like their super user, right? And he dog food the hell out of the product. And this turned into a culture and a very fundamental behavior that they expected everyone to do, that everyone dog foods. And it's one of the ways that, as they say, they maintain that excellence inside the company and using the app is by using the app daily, right? So dog fooding is a practice that you can take and bring to your company if you're not already doing it. Lots of people do it. It's basically using your own product. That's what dog fooding means, eating your own dog food. Some people like to say drinking your own champagne, whatever the hell floats your boat and feels a little less crude and a little bit more politically correct for you. But essentially it's using your product, and using your product as much as possible is what we want to do. And that helps us, like they say, love the product yourself, but also spot things and just pick up things all the time. I think it also helps build product sense. It helps you understand your product really deeply. I know that some products, B2B products, very niche products, are very hard to dog food. I have a client right now, which is basically they do software for hearing products like hearing aids and stuff like that. Very hard to dog food if I don't have a hearing problem. But essentially we try to dog food this stuff as much as possible. So whatever you can do, I think is really, really powerful. What I think is super cool, so this thing is super cool, is that they started scaling, right? And they went from the founder dog fooding everything and notifying about every single bug to having hundreds of employees all dog fooding. And at some point in the process, they're like, we need to scale this, right? Like there's so many people raising, issues and bugs and that type of stuff. We need to scale this. And what they did was they built a feature. They built an internal feature called Shake to Report. And that's what Duo's doing down here. And Shake to Report is a simple tool that basically lets anyone in the company snapshot and report an issue instantly by just shaking your device, right? And this, as they say here, has become a very vital part of the development process. So I think this is super cool because they've basically taken something, a practice, and they've built something for themselves to make their own process and their own way of doing things much more effective. Cool. We're not going to go, they talk about the bar for hiring, but we're not going to go into that. We're going to go into this. And this is what I said, more on this in a second. V1s, not MVPs. I'm a big fan of this. This is something I did a whole video on, right? Talk about that release thing and the clarity between releasing. I often break this down into 3 separate activities: deploying, releasing, and launching, right? So you can watch that video. I'll pin it up there. It'll probably also be down in the description. You can watch that video of me breaking down what those 3 things are. It's a whole 30-minute video where I go through it in depth, but I'm going to touch on one part of that because that's what they're talking about here. And it's all about trying to do V1s, not MVPs. So hear me out because you're already probably like, what do you mean? No MVPs. MVPs are like a crucial part of the product process. One of the things with MVPs is it's really just an experiment, right? And one of the things that once upon a time worked really, really well was even bringing some of those early versions to market. But what's changed over time is that one, customer expectations have increased. But two, if you are like Duolingo, you have an existing product with an existing customer base. And if I've got 47 million daily active users, I don't really want to ship things that are, unbaked, not polished, right? Like they had polished up before. What they do is they do V1s. And this is a practice that I'm seeing get more and more adopted everywhere. So the difference here is that not necessarily that they don't really do MVPs, they kind of do. But what we want to do is we want to experiment in private and we want to test it, see if it works, get confidence that it works, get confidence that this is going to be successful, and then scale that and bring it to market. So what we want to do is we want to do those MVPs, so they kind of probably do them, but we want to do them more in experimentation fashion. We want to do it to early access users. We want to do things like use prototype testing and that type of stuff. We want to use alpha, beta, user communities, maybe even use the product, use that feature internally. And only once we see all those metrics become positive and we have a high degree of confidence that this thing is something that people actually want, it actually works, and all of that type of stuff, do we then polish it? We make it really, really good. And then we put the weight of marketing and stuff behind it and we launch it to market, right? So we want to do a V1 to market, not necessarily an MVP to market. We want to do those MVPs more privately, right? So I'll give you just a simple example that I did for the product mentorship, which, by the way, if you're interested in getting coaching or mentoring around product management, I coach founders, product leaders all around the world. I run a product mentorship. You can check that out at productpathways.com. But basically for the product mentorship, what I did was for about 6 months, I ran it as a closed mentorship community. And I tested and learned about it, right? So I basically got some of my old past one-on-one coaching clients. So I've been working with companies. So I basically work with companies, I do this, and I have the product mentorship is what I have as my 3 kind of main things. But prior to product pathways and stuff, I did a lot of one-on-one coaching. I worked with a lot of companies. And I reached back out to some of those people I worked with, I coached with the past, and I basically got a small group together and I started to test this whole new idea. In fact, it wasn't even called the product mentorship back then. It was called a community. And through all of that 6 months of testing and refining and having real people to, refine the offering behind it, that is what I used. So that was like my MVP, and do that in private. So like the world didn't know that I was doing this. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing this. I didn't launch a wait list or anything like that. But once I started doing that, I started to refine my offering. And then once I started to feel like I had confidence on that offering based on those people, then I started to do like a wait list and I started to talk about messaging because now I wanted to test messaging. And I started to build up a wait list of people who might be interested in the mentorship. And then I started to get ideas around price points and that type of stuff from them. And only once I got all of that and I felt like the mentorship was very well packaged and polished, and I had a V1 of the mentorship, which was very far away from its original MVP, only then did I bring that to market. So this is what they're talking about. And this is something that more and more companies are adopting. So this is a practice. I think context matters here. If you are a really small startup that doesn't have an audience or a distribution channel and no users, and your users are your mom and dad and your 2 best friends, then I think you can still ship MVPs. But as time goes on, you probably want to start to ship V1s. You want to get high quality signals and you want to have confidence that it's going to work. You can never have perfect confidence, but you want to have good confidence before you actually bring it to market. Hopefully that makes sense around that. You can watch that whole video as well, so go check it out, but I go deeper into it, but hopefully that makes sense of what we mean by, changing from MVPs to V1s. And that felt like a perfect segue to principle number 3 that they have, which is ship it. So this is now taking that and bring it to market, right? So talking about that V1, they want to bring it to market. This principle is much more focused on moving at speed, right? So this is where they're going to talk about sense of urgency and having that rapid experimentation. They ship new versions of the app every single week. They run hundreds of experiments across the company at any given time. They basically move really, really fast, right? But there's a difference between shipping an experiment and something that is closed versus bringing a V1 to the market or an MVP to the market, right? This is a lot of the stuff that you know already very, very well. Like, we want to have many experiments. We want to move fast. The faster we can experiment and work out whether we're successful or not, the faster we can actually advance and move towards our mission and hit those outcomes. I think something that, product companies really accept, and I think founders tend to have this mindset a lot more than senior managers inside like large established companies. So I work with both sides of the fence, and this is something I've observed. And again, this isn't me pointing fingers or saying one is better than the other, but I tend to find that like founders have been kicked to the curb a few times, right? Like they know that like no matter how much you want to set a goal to say, I'm going to make 50 grand this month or something like that, it's just not, like sometimes it's just not going to happen because you just aren't in complete control of the outcomes. And I think again, founders have, been dragged through the coals. I definitely know, or at least I definitely feel like I have. But if you accept that you aren't in complete control of the outcomes, then the only way that you really work out how to deliver your outcomes is through rapid experimentation. It's only through trying many different things and kind of weaving your way through the path that you actually get to that outcome. It's not about saying we want to increase annual recurring revenue in the next 3 months, right? That's a goal. That's nice to do, but we don't know if we can actually do it. We don't actually know exactly what's going to help us do that. We need to experiment. We need to try many different things, and maybe we get there. Hopefully we get there. I hope we get there, but we don't always get there. And again, I think founders have embraced that a lot more. So when you do get across that mentality, at least this has helped me. I feel like if you can get across that mentality, it really helps you to embrace this rapid experimentation, and it's absolutely important, right? I like this clock speed mindset that they have too about how they work. The concept comes from a microprocessor technology, as they say, or clock speed, basically like how fast is the processor working. So what they're doing is basically how do we minimize the gaps between interactions, right? Like how fast are we moving? I often refer to this, and not my term either, as decision velocity, right? So how fast are decisions happening in a company? Let me paint you 2 stories to just illustrate the differences. Clock speed, as they say here, is rapid decision making, right? A very tangible example is, imagine you and I are in a meeting and we're talking about something. And then we're like, hey, we need to work that out. And then what we do is we maybe say, hey, are you free this afternoon to talk about that? Or we even, worst case, we're like, let's get so-and-so and so-and-so together in a room tomorrow and let's just like thrash this out. Even better, even faster decision making would be like, hey, we need to work that out. And we turn and there's like a whiteboard and we're like, start working it out. Oh, we need so-and-so. Oh, bring them in. And we start to work it out. And then in the space of the next 20 minutes, we might have an answer already. So we went from identification of something, 20 minutes later being resolved. Now it could be 2 hours. I don't know how long it took you would take us to solve that thing, but you get my point. Now to paint the opposite picture, because I have clients on both sides of the fence. I have clients where we identify something, we're talking about it tomorrow or that afternoon. Now I have clients on the other side of the fence where we identify something and we're like, oh, my calendar is pretty full this week, right? Like, so-and-so, we never get time with them. Next thing you know, you schedule a meeting for next week. Next week rolls around. Oh, I'm feeling sick. I can't make this meeting. Oh, we'll reschedule to next week. And then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, you're having meetings about this thing. You still haven't resolved it. That is extremely slow decision velocity versus really fast decision velocity. And this is one of the reasons why you don't want to have calendar Tetris, as I like to call it, where your calendar's full and everyone's trying to like move these blocks to just kind of fit together. You want slack in the system, as we refer to it. You want to have that free time so you can tackle these things and increase decision velocity, right? But that extends not only to when the decision was made, but the clock is still running. How long between when it was made to how long we experiment on it, we implement it, we get feedback, we then make the changes, all of that type of stuff. There is a quote. So this is Lewis referring to the urgency thing, right? Because sometimes we think about urgency, or at least I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but when I read this, sometimes we think about urgency as like reckless, right? Like we associate running fast and speed and stuff as being reckless. And this is the reason why all of these things need to be balanced against the other principles, right? We want to move with urgency, but we still have a bar. And excellence is still something that we strive for. We want to experiment rapidly, but we also want to polish it, right? Like we want to do V1s, but we still want to experiment really, really rapidly. What Lewis says here is that moving with urgency means choosing what matters and pursuing it with a ridiculous amount of focus. And what I love about this is actually, I think the companies that, when urgency becomes recklessness, it's generally a symptom, not a root cause, not a root problem. It's generally a symptom of a lack of being able to choose what actually matters. Because when we're trying to juggle many different balls, that's when trying to do something really quickly becomes really, really hard because we're trying to do 5 things at once. What we actually should be doing is we need to get clearer on our strategy. We need to get clearer on what actually matters, and we need to pursue that with urgency. And when you have laser focus, urgency is no longer reckless because it's like we have a lot of focus. Because what we actually want to achieve inside companies, and this is a lesson for everyone, leaders, founders, business owners, entrepreneurs, product managers, what we really want to do is create focus and really laser in on what truly matters and then pursue that with urgency. And there's this really good quote from Steve Jobs on this where he talked about focus, right? And he basically said, people think that focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on, but it's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that are there. You have to pick carefully. I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And this often gets summarized to basically saying that focus is saying no to the 100 good ideas so you can say yes to that one idea, right? It's actually more about saying no than it is about saying yes. And this is the hard thing about strategy. This is the hard thing about prioritization. So let's talk about product reviews. We'll go to the 99 bad ideas in a second. So once upon a time, they didn't have product reviews, right? So what is a product review? They say it up here. A product review for them is a meeting where they green light every change to the app led by the product org, but anyone can listen in. So anyone can join. It's completely transparent. It's a big thing about their culture, but it's run by the product org. So in the early days, Lewis, their founder, used to make a lot of decisions in informal meetings. This is very common for startups, very common for a founder, right? We just talk about it, work gets done. Yeah. Now, as the company scales, this is where things get messy because there's people who need to be informed because they're also making decisions, right? If we're not clear on the decisions, how they're being made, how they're being communicated, all that type of stuff, it just creates a mess, right? And they don't even know, this is another thing. I refer to this as the dinosaur tail. As a leader, you need to be aware of your dinosaur tail. I got that from Team of Teams. It's a book by General Stanley McChrystal, or retired general. And basically, like you think about like a dinosaur walking down the street, right? You've got this big tail and you're doing these like micro movements, but your tail's like smashing everything up and causing all kinds of chaos. That is often you as a leader. And sometimes you might be just musing, right? Like you just like, hey, think about this, or what about that? Or like you're just thinking aloud. But sometimes it's very hard to know if the CEO and founder is just like throwing a statement off the cuff or whether it's actually a binding thing. Like, should we do this? Is this? And that's the dinosaur tail. We can make these really small statements and then suddenly everyone takes it as gospel. They all run and execute on it. And millions of dollars later, we're like, why did we do that? So they needed a better approach. So they took inspiration from engineering code review process and they developed a formal structure for their product reviews. I've seen many different product reviews. I've seen product reviews where it's more of like an update, where we're looking at the product, we're looking at what's coming in the roadmap, and we're just talking about the changes. I've seen product reviews like this, where they are decision-making, right? They are like, we're becoming very clear on prioritization, some of the key decisions that we're making. And basically like the product people need to come and, well, I should say the trios, right? It's not always the product managers, but you need to come with that evidence, right? So come with your idea, come with the evidence to try and get that basically prioritization. For them, the meeting is chaired and done by a rotating group of product leaders, basically trying to ensure that there's diversity, right? So this probably, again, links into that bottom-up culture that Duolingo seems to have. What's really interesting, because I've never seen this before, product reviews were so successful that even marketing started to adopt it, and they had marketing reviews to basically, align their campaigns and all that type of stuff, right? But what's really, really cool, they talk about this a bit later in the handbook, but these are completely open and transparent to everyone. This is something that I've seen in other companies as well. I've seen both sides of the fence, and I get the fear of being radically transparent because you're like, but what about if it's impacting people's jobs and people get scared because like, would they even feel like they have a job in the future and all that type of stuff? So I get all of that. But I've always seen radical transparency do really, really good stuff and be a net positive over a net negative. You'll be surprised. People are adults. They can understand. They can also read between the lines. Like they know when like a reorg is coming or change is coming. You're not actually fooling anyone by trying to hide it behind the scenes. You might as well be upfront about it and talk about it and let them mentally become prepared. And here's another observation I have, just to not to go down a rabbit hole, but like for 2 seconds, entertain me for a rabbit hole. If you do leave uncertainty open, people tend to assume the worst. So they tend to assume I don't have a job or something like that, right? But if you can bring some more clarity to the situation and clarify some of those things, then it's always going to be much better. Because maybe it's not that bad, right? We tend to jump to the worst conclusions. So you being a little bit more open and honest actually tends to lessen the blow. Because if you leave them in their dark thoughts, right, like on their own, they're thinking about the worst thing and the worst thing that can happen. I worked at a startup where we were transparent about everything, or at least the founder was. Talked about how much money we had in the bank, how much runway we had. We talked about how many sales we had, everything. We did that every single Friday. And we would also talk about those things like we need to let people go because we don't have enough money in the bank. And to my surprise, because I had never experienced anything like it before, people were like putting their hand up to take pay cuts so we could save some people a job. And then we're working out how do we double down and how can people work extra time to help with pitching and get more deals and all that type of stuff. So it's amazing how much it just brings people together, not necessarily tears them apart. So that's probably a lesson out there for the founders and the product leaders out there. This is really, really cool as an idea as well. So experimentation is often a quantity game. And to basically help embrace that culture of experimentation and the culture of like no idea is a bad idea type thing, because that's a principle of ideation. They do this apparently. They basically had a practice at their leadership offsites and it turned into a tradition where they would call it 99 bad ideas. And they'll basically brainstorm outrageous concepts, right? How do we come up with 99 really bad ideas for the company? And some of those things would turn into cool ideas, right? Over the years, as they said, these types of questions help them consistently uncover new opportunities to delight our learners and advance our mission. So I really, really love this. I love leaders leading by example. I love the idea of just coming up with bad ideas. By the way, the late Charlie Munger, I should say, business partner to Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, one of the biggest successful firms ever to exist. Charlie was very big on inversion and inverting your thinking. So by the way, if you think about the 99 bad ideas from an inversion perspective, you can take those bad ideas and then just invert them. And some of them might actually turn into some really, really good ideas. By the way, that is an ideation technique. On that point, let's just talk about ideation for a second, because this is another thing that I have observed. Ideation is super underrated and super underutilized. There are so few companies that I see that actually properly leverage ideation like this. And it's crazy because your 99 bad ideas could help you come up with one really good idea. And that activity could be a 30-minute activity that is full of laughs and a lot of fun. It's got so many other positives, right? Like just from a cultural point of view and just having fun at work and having some laughs and bringing the team together. Excellent. And then by the way, if we come up with one really good idea at the back of it, even better, amazing, right? Now times that across hundreds of teams. Landslide, right? Like so much goodness that's being missed out. That is where we want to get to. And again, the difference between companies, I think, that do this type of stuff better versus those who struggle, ideation is a core component of it. Teams ideate, everyone ideates. We spend time diverging. We spend time coming up with really bad ideas to try and unearth that good idea. And sometimes it's an hour of ideation. Sometimes it's 10 minutes. It's just exploring what's possible. So I could go really deep onto the neuroscience behind ideation, why you should do it, all that type of stuff. That's stuff that I've put into my product discovery course that's coming soon, or maybe it's already out by the time you're watching this. But that is something that I just don't see enough teams do. And I just wanted to emphasize it because we need more teams doing ideation. It's going to help you build better products. Just do it. All right. Like, trust me type situation. Show, don't tell. This is cool. So this is something that basically show, don't tell. Well, the way that they refer to it is that it means that we want to lead with results of our work, not with the stories. So as we know, a lot of companies like to communicate via persuasion. We like to use slide decks, tell a great story, all that type of stuff. They want the numbers to be the story. So really the short of this is that we want to focus on the actual results, and we want to allow those results to drive those decisions, right? We want our decisions to be based in evidence, not, abstract narratives, as they say there. And we want it to be backed by data is really what this whole thing's about. So we want to show those results, not tell them. One of the practices that they have developed out the back of this is these TLDRs. So I mentioned that right at the beginning. So one of the ways that they show, don't tell is through TLDRs. They're essentially executive summaries at the top of any important communication. They use it from feature performance analysis to pre-reads for a meeting, new policy announcements. They use it on everything apparently, or most things apparently. TLDRs are a cool idea. It's basically like, here's the summary, here's the cliff notes. If you're interested in those cliff notes, keep reading, but here's the essential points. If you don't have the amount of time to actually go and read it, you at least get your clear points across. As they say here, it increases the chance of being seen, being remembered, helps make complex information more digestible. I also just love it from the perspective of we are putting the reader or the user in first, right? So we're trying to make the format as effective as possible or as easy as possible for the reader. That's essentially what they're doing here. So that's a cool practice. Definitely I already do kind of like exec summaries, TLDRs already. I've never done it as a formal thing inside companies. I've never seen companies do it as a formal practice, but I think that is super cool. Now, here's something to zoom in on because we already talked about letting the data speak for itself. There is a tyranny of metrics, right? So they say here, fixating on numbers can sometimes lead us astray. Metrics are valuable, but in isolation, they paint an incomplete picture. For example, learning outcomes, that is what a student should know after completing a lesson, are notoriously tricky to measure. In cases like these, we have to trust intuition and expertise. So I've talked about this before, and I've written about it a lot. And essentially what you want to do, the crux of it is that you want to be data informed, not data driven, right? Now they talk about this multiple times inside the handbook, but a perfect example of this is that early in the process, when you're dealing with an opportunity or a new idea, it's really, really hard to quantify the impact of that, right? It's very hard to put actual metrics to it. At that point in a puzzle, you really just guess it. It's very hard to put hard metrics against it. Now, some companies will insist. They will insist that everything needs to be quantified upfront before we invest into it and we make a decision about it. And what ends up happening when you do that is there's a whole bunch of opportunities that are just very tricky to measure, right? Or very tricky to quantify, at least in its nascent early stage, right? When it's more of an half-baked idea or more of a problem space or more of an opportunity. And what ends up happening is that we can't invest in those ideas, or we don't invest in those ideas, I should say, which means you're basically leaving a whole bunch of stuff on the table, right? A whole bunch of opportunities that are untapped that you don't really get to actually do because you've built in this framework or this rule that you have to be able to quantify things. There's also a real danger again of those metrics just leading you astray. Some simple examples, there's so many examples, but I don't think Duolingo ever thought that Duo would be so successful, or that they ever thought, some of the things that they did about the icon changing and how sassy, the sassy notifications that Duo likes to do, all of those types of things. I don't think they thought any of them was going to be as successful as they were. And trying to quantify the impact of all of them upfront or even today is very, very hard, right? So you got to be careful about that. There's a saying that is, data can only tell you about the past, not the future. So be wary of that as well. So some other things to touch on here, right? Obviously, ideas before egos, no sales pitches. They want to give a chance for teams and ideas to prove themselves. So we want to prioritize results over opinions. What I like about this is that they give a lot of space for the teams to try those things, right? They want to give a lot of space for teams to experiment, try new things, and allow those metrics, right? You've got to prove it. And I love this way of thinking, which is you can do anything. As long as it's forward in our mission, as long as you work within these guardrails, you can do anything. But you've got to, if you want us to actually double down on it and make it a V1 that we actually bring to our customers, you've got to prove that it's really, really good. You got to build it. You got to drive some outcomes, and you got to show me that this is actually going to really, really work, and allow those data and stuff to drive those decisions, as opposed to, again, narratives and all that type of stuff. As a result, they favor prototypes over pitch decks. That's definitely something I've seen in other companies, favoring trying to bring concepts to life. The good part about like AI right now is it should make that even cheaper and easier, right? Like, how do you basically leverage things like Figma's, I think it's called Magic, or like Lovable, or like Miro's AI or something to build like, wireframes and an early prototype, just to bring the thing to life, as opposed to writing a big spec there, or like a pitch deck, right? This is pretty self-explanatory. Great ideas don't need to explain themselves. They want the app to be intuitive. I see that as part of the benchmarks. This is worth touching on. I'll just highlight this here. So celebrating innovators, they tend to be team first, but every now and then they want to reward individual work. So every year there's a Duoversary, and they pick a few standout contributors to give them a innovation award. So this is, again, maybe I'll quote Charlie Munger again here. He basically said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And this is trying to incentivize, again, innovation, experimentation, that type of stuff. You need to reward these things if you want people to do more of them. It's basically company culture type thing. And then we get on to the last principle, which is very culture focused. So this one is all focused on culture, making it fun, bringing things to life. Now, Duolingo is a quirky product, and it's quirky because they're quirky type people. They want their culture to be fun. They want their culture to reflect all of those things. There's really a lot of things that is focused on here. So they talk about like play. Duolingo doesn't really fit in a category. It's not a game. It's not an educational product either. It blurs the lines, and they think that's magic. That's also something where innovation tends to happen, trying to find those friction points. This is where I talked about that open door, that fishbowl, where basically the Lewis's go to conference room as a fishbowl, all that type of stuff. Joy by design. They have, hundreds of clubs, all that type of stuff. And this is where we get to the final thing that we have to mention before we wrap this video up, which is that every year they have a winter getaway where the whole company packs up, heads to Cancun with no agendas or panels or training sessions. Now that is worth highlighting. Why? Some companies do these annual event type things, right? And a lot of companies do offsites, but we always pack those things with agendas. We have people doing talks, we have strategy sessions, we have team building sessions. We always, basically make it about work, because after all, it's a work type thing, right? But I think this is really, really fascinating. This is the first company I've heard of that has no agendas, no panels. The goal is simply to get together, hang out, and unwind. So whilst an annual trip, maybe not to Cancun, but somewhere like that, is not necessarily unique, I think doing it with no agendas, no panels or training sessions is definitely unique. And that's it. That's how Duolingo does product. As you can see, there is a lot more inside this document that you can go through. I didn't want to go through it word for word, but if this video has interested you, by all means, go for it. But I've really done this video, pulled out the cliff notes so you don't have to go through it word for word. This is essentially your TLDR executive summary to that. And if you enjoyed this and you got value out of it, check out this video right here that I did on 11 absolute goldmine lessons on how to 10x your product from the amazing Rory Sutherland. Check it out. It's really, really good. A lot more lessons in there as well. And as usual, thanks for watching. I'll see you at the next one.